Hello to everybody. We are here to talk all about NRR and specifically some automation hacks, some do's and some don'ts that you can use to hopefully get started, go out and land and expand. And we've got a couple of expert panelists that are going to be guiding us through this discussion today. So I have Jayme, who's the CRO over at Traction Complete, and Dan, who is the head of research over at Gong. Thank you guys very much for joining. As I said, we're here to talk all about NRR. And I guess to get started on this, Jayme, why is this important now? Like, why now? You're the CRO over at Traction Complete. Obviously, land and expand, something that's always been talked about. But why, especially now as we sit here in April of 2025, why is this whole notion of NRR super critical now?
Yeah, so I've been a tech CRO for the last 10-ish years and been in tech go-to-market for 20 plus instead of aging myself to 25. Been working with great companies that have been high-growth companies, and we've all seen the shift happen over the last 5-6 years. Early parts of my career, it was just throw as many bodies and capacity on it as much as possible, and it was growth at all costs. But we've seen through COVID post, now money is harder to actually get. It's changed the landscape dramatically. And you hear now more CROs talking about expansion. You hear more CROs talking about, or executive teams talking about rule of 40. That was probably not even a thing previously. And then the reality is it's just harder to get new logos. There's more technology coming into the market, but it creates a lot of noise, and the acquisition of customers is super hard. And I think there's like you can see here in this slide, what I've learned early on is that gap between growth at all cost, and oftentimes I'm more of the optimist than the pessimist. The negative side is like growth at all costs ultimately impacts your net retention going forward. And we know there's lots of zombie companies that grew at all costs, spent a bunch of money, got a lot of money into the market, and then now they've churned out those people. They're not growing as fast, and now they're all of a sudden going the other way, where I'm more on the optimist side. Actually, if you did it right from the start and focused in on the complete customer journey, and then you'd actually be getting more revenue on the new business front, and then you'd continue to grow, which is, if you're in a SaaS business, the ultimate thing that you're looking to do is have your starting revenue be more than your finishing revenue. And here's a great stat, which is businesses have a 60 to 70% chance more of landing and expanding their existing customer base. I've been on the sales new business side for a long time. 5% is probably not great of a win rate or conversion rate for a new prospect. You're probably struggling to find product market fit or ICP. But if you get anywhere between 20 to 30% and above, that's a pretty darn good rate. But the math is quite simple. It doesn't work. So you have to really start to focus in on that, keeping your customers, keeping them happy, and growing with them.
Yep. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And Dan, I'm going to actually launch a poll here real quick, because we're going to get into talking about growth initiatives. And I know you all did a lot of research around top growth initiatives that you were seeing, that people were exploring for 2025. So before I pull up the slide that actually showcases the results that you all found in your research, maybe set the stage and just tell us a little bit about the study and some of the research that you've done around growth and growth initiatives. And then in about 30, 45 seconds, I'll kind of share the results of the poll here to see how the audience answers actually line up with the research answers that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So besides all of the proprietary Gong Lab data, so actual customer data from our 4,000 plus accounts and what is happening in sales and revenue cycles these days, we also run primary research studies in the form of surveys. There's nothing necessarily proprietary about it, but we like to keep a pulse on what's top of mind for revenue leadership. In November, we launched the State of Revenue Growth 2025 report. In that, we wanted to first take a look back at how was 2024 and understand the challenges and gaps that teams were trying to fill. But then looking ahead, we wanted to understand what were the top growth levers that businesses were going to start pulling on to continue. What we saw is that 2023 retention was a really large challenge for customers. 73% of survey respondents in an earlier study said they missed their retention and renewal goals. What we saw is that 2024 performance improved in that regard, but you'll see here that the overwhelming top choice for the growth initiatives that teams are looking to execute in 2025 is really that upsell cross-sell. So again, all the great data that Jayme just showed us around like, hey, we know it's cheaper and easier to grow accounts than to acquire new business. And so this is just really good validation that like the upsell, cross-sell was the top answer, which was not necessarily a surprise, but it was an interesting finding, just given the challenges that teams have had over the past 18 to 24 months in terms of retention and growing accounts.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I wonder too, you can see these results here that I'm sharing, they kind of line up with the results from the study that you all did. I wonder how much of the new products or services to the market involve those that are here working at technology companies and are bringing some new AI product or initiative to the market. I actually bet my guess would be that's probably closer to 100% of people at companies like that. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, let's talk a little bit about NRR. So we set the stage a little bit here, talking about obviously some research that validates why upsell, cross-sell is such a critical piece of people's growth plans this year. So I guess, Jayme, for you, let's say CRO, you're in revenue operations, whatever it might be, you're in your first 30, 60, 90 days on the job. What are some of the first things that you think about as it relates to net revenue retention and maybe levers that you could pull, how to identify problem areas? Like, how should folks start thinking about that from scratch?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm no longer in 30, 60, 90 here at Traction, but I'm now fourth quarter in. But I was given a gift going to various companies of people, process, and performance. So thinking about those three things. And so you check the people, make sure you have the right people and talent in place and all the right positions. You check your systems and process and tech stack that you actually have. And then you see where the performance is and what it should be, whether that's for new business and what your goals are, whether that is for net retention, what your goals are, et cetera. So you dive into that 30, 60, 90. You're learning. I'm a big fan of get into it, get your hands dirty and learn the process and learn what's happening in the business because you can only do so much due diligence coming into a company until you actually get into the company, and then you really find out the great surprises or the ones that you didn't know about or they didn't tell you about at the start. But so you do that as it relates to net retention. So it's now the number one thing that we should be talking about. The critical thing there is then that is the number one priority for the business. And that comes from the executive team on down. If we don't set the tone of that is the most important thing, then you're going to be on this treadmill of landing customers, churning them out, and the business is going to be one of those zombie companies that doesn't end up going anywhere. So it has to be the tone right from the executive team and setting that tone that this is the most important thing. And we're in the SaaS business. It really is the most important thing. $1 has to start to equal $2, $3, $4, $5 for the company if you're looking to have acquisition, mergers, and exit, et cetera. It's the valuation that everybody looks at first. World-class is 110 to 115% of what you need to actually drive for. So number one, setting the tone. And then number two, and that's then rallying the teams. Oftentimes it lands on like AM and CS. Just them. I shouldn't be just them. It's marketing. It's the new business team. It's product. It's everybody. It's the operations team that needs to take full accountability of driving and making sure that we delight our customers and we add new value to them always so that they grow with us. Real talk, mistakes I've made. I've been at growth companies and in earlier probably when it was like growth at all costs. Let's just land new logos. And then it's like what ends up happening is you churn them out. So checking your AM team, making sure you have an AM team. I've gone into a business where there was no AM team. So the first thing that we did was stand up an account management team and bring accountability and then start to bring some process. On the RevOps side, the more that you can bring valuable data to the team, the more that you can bring data in that we can then run to ground and or action on. A lot of times we spend tons of times on Medic or Challenger or some sort of new business sales process, but have we done it on the account management team? So from day one of kickoff, onboarding, enablement to their launch of your new offering, how is that experience? And then when's the value drop? When's your QBRs? Like doing the same thing through the value chain from the post sale all the way through to the renewal to the expansion are things that I've done as well to run the same types of methodologies. But it starts at the top and drives through, and it's one team, one dream around this. And then everybody is focused in on that aspect.
Yeah. Two things you hit on that I just want to double down on and really put an exclamation point on. One is you talked about this needing to be a company-wide initiative. I know in the past, not necessarily for retention or expansion or upsell, but things like churn. I've had leaders and CEOs say, churn is a company problem that we're going to solve. This is not a CS problem. Same thing when you talk about wanting to increase NRR, drive improvements in retention, expansion, upsell, that it needs to come top down. It needs to be in everybody's charter for that quarter, the next 6 months, the next year, from product to sales to marketing to CS. So it is not just a CS problem. And then two, the other thing you mentioned, use all of the learnings that you have on how you close new business and go to market to acquire new customers. Use all of that to develop the right game plan around people, process, and technology for how you're going to improve retention, renewals, and drive expansion and upsell. So while you may be starting from, I'll say scratch, you're really not, because you obviously have all of this knowledge and all of these learnings as an operator on how you acquire new logos. So leverage that to do the same sort of thing or accomplish your goals on the retention side. Dan, what would you add to some of the things that Jayme mentioned there around NRR?
Yeah, I think I wholeheartedly agree and would echo what Jayme's saying. I think Gong does a really good job. So I say in marketing, right? And at the end of the day, we simplify it to like really, what are the three main things we're trying to drive towards in fiscal 26, which just started for us 2 months ago. And one of those is retention, but understanding how everyone plays a role. And it's baked into our OKRs, right? So we have our company priorities, we have our marketing team priorities, and then I have my own as a content marketer. Like, how am I contributing to retention and expansion of our existing customers? And how does my content influence that? I think a lot of times it's very easy, especially in small companies for marketing. They're like, okay, we just need a source and influence pipeline and source and influence revenue, provide more leads and MQLs for folks. But existing customers, especially for a SaaS organization, is so essential. I think just to echo Jayme, rallying the team and making sure everyone's aligned, but are we actually tying our metrics and our OKRs within each of our functional areas back to those priorities? I think a lot of times it's, yes, this is the priority for us this year, but then by the time we get 2 or 3 layers down in the org, we can lose focus on, are we actually contributing to those overall goals? And that OKRs for folks that maybe use a different terminology or different tracking objectives and key results.
I'm a big OKR person. And here's how some other ways I've seen this actually play out in real life. You mentioned on the marketing team, content creation, maybe you're focused on pipeline generation, right? Upsell, cross-sell, pipeline is a real thing, right? So if you're a content marketer tasked with now thinking about how as a business are we going to drive upsell and cross-sell, right? Like your content can now be aimed at, oh, maybe we should create content around this particular feature that's maybe in this more premium sort of product that we can share and send out to existing customers to help drive maybe some awareness or some problem identification in that particular area. You also have things like, whose job is it to identify expansion opportunities? Should that lie with the account manager or the CSM? Should that be on the sales rep side? Again, leverage all those things that you know on the new business side and make sure that everyone across the entire company has goals and objectives that align to driving improvements in NRR. So one, I want you to talk a little bit about the actual math behind net revenue retention, because it might seem obvious because we talk about NRR all the time, but obviously there's numerator and there's the denominator, there's adding and subtracting. And so you can have multiple things moving at the same time. But I also want you to then talk about, you mentioned the rule of 40 at the beginning. I forgot to ask you at the beginning to actually just define that so that people know what that is as well. So take those two things. I'll let you choose what order you do them in, but talk about the math a little bit.
Yeah. So this one is pretty simple. You can just pull it up in your AI or Google or whatever you want to do it. But essentially your starting revenue amount, in this case, it's done by MRR, so by monthly revenue. Then it's your churned revenue in that particular month, your downgraded revenue in that particular month. So churn and downgraded are different in that, meaning you churned a logo out or you contracted. So if your account started at $100 $100 in the month, and they came in at $95. There's that math there. So you're subtracting that, so you're downgraded, and then you're adding any of your expansion, which can be in two fronts, which is both the additional usage or additional licenses that you're sold, or into if you have additional products and services that you can actually put in there, and or even what we'll get into is the fun part of like in the hierarchy where you're adding in additional parts of the parent-child relationship into the global hierarchy, which is one of the hacks that we'll talk about all over the starting number. And so what you ultimately want there in goods, if you're raising money or your organization is trying to raise money, you have to get over 100%. And really you should be somewhere in anywhere from 100% to 115. If you get to 115, you're winning, if you will. And if you're above that, then you're really, really winning. So that's that one. And then, so that's any questions there or comments or additional thoughts?
The only thing I'll add before you get into the rule of 40, just for people to consider, is keep in mind there's a period element to this, meaning you're comparing month to month. It can be this month and next month. It can be quarter, like starting at the beginning of a quarter, end of a quarter. It could be starting at the beginning of a year. It could be end of a year. And so keep in mind that values will change as you do that. And some things may happen that may not be obvious. For example, if you're looking at this over the course of a 12-month period of time, you could have someone that started and churned in that same period. These are things that could be different if you're looking at month to month or quarter to quarter. So just keep that in mind on the period element. And then you mentioned like the percentages. The reasons why that's important is it's basically saying, hey, if we never acquired another new customer in our existence, would this business still be able to grow? And to what Jayme said before, if you're at those numbers that are above 100%, the answer to that question is yes, which is why it's so valuable to investors. So, all right, what's the rule of 40, Jayme?
So essentially the simplest way to put it is you're doing, and we didn't put it in there, we can actually use it as a follow-up there and put some more content around it. I'm not the expert there, but it's another way to evaluate the business. And you're essentially evaluating the business with the revenue growth rate over your profit margin. And you ultimately want it at 40% and or above. So your revenue growth rate is your current year minus your prior year over your prior year equals your growth rate. So you can know you're growing at X percent. And then your profit margin is EBITDA over your revenue. And then add those two together. And if they're greater than 40%, you're doing great as a business. So essentially just taking a little bit more of the cost side of the business, which is critical, like how many people are you throwing at it? And typically, as Dan, we talked about earlier, which is it should be more cost effective to drive more revenue from your existing customers. We all know it costs a lot of money to put on webinars, go to trade shows, go to conferences, to pay new business sellers, et cetera, especially when the conversion rate is only 5 to 20% versus 60 to 70%.
A 5% improvement in customer retention can increase profitability by 25 to 95%. For all the operators out there, it's important. We talked a little bit about NRR. Jayme mentioned specifically some of the math incorporating growth rates and margin, for example, profitability. So again, those are great ways to frame as you're going out and executing, deploying tactics, new processes, new technology, right? Think about, hey, how am I going to connect those things to those outcomes that are ultimately going to be really important for the business? And on that note, let's actually get into some of the tactics for customer retention. Dan, I want to start with you and specifically talk about churn signals and how we can identify churn, or I should say signals of potential churn or maybe risk before it's too late. Because I think a lot of us have been in a spot where we maybe put some markers or we start looking for things. We all want to know when there's risk related to certain accounts, but it can be really hard to get right in terms of the timing. What should you look for? And then there's obviously can be so much noise because you've got all these tools, all these systems that are collecting all of these data points. So how do you look at things? And obviously with Gong being a leader in the conversational intelligence space, curious to get your take on retention and some of the tactics and signals that folks should be able to look for.
Yeah, I love the word signals that you used. I think when I first saw tactics, I was like, oh, did I put my slides in like the wrong? I love to think of this as like signals and data sources that are going to help you better predict as a RevOps professional, like where account health scores. There's so much that could be baked into it, from product utilization, to CSAT and NPS to activity and engagement with the account and your champion at the account. There's no right or wrong answer to what metrics and data points you should be looking at, but I think a historically underutilized, and a great thing is conversational intelligence. I think Gong kind of pioneered this space in 2016, and it was actually very fortunate. We're now a revenue AI platform, but because we started in the conversation intelligence, the wealth of data that is in this treasure trove of customer conversations that hopefully your organizations are capturing if you are using a tool like Gong today. This is from the same study we introduced in the beginning, looking at the growth levers that teams were prioritizing in 2025. A really harsh reality, I think, to uncover is that of those 811 revenue leaders that we spoke to, only 27% told us that they're fully confident their team understands the needs, preferences, and buying behaviors of their customers. And when we asked them why, they said three things. And if you click to the next slide, I think we have those. So those three things were, one, market volatility, right? So obviously, since 2022, we've seen a lot of change. Budgets were getting constricted or cut. The second was the availability of actionable data. And the key word there is actionable. So 12% of leaders said that their CRM, the way it exists today and the way it's set up and structured today, told us that their team can't really drive action. Early on in Gong's history, we actually did a study understanding how many words are spoken in a typical 30-minute conversation versus what ends up in CRM in terms of seller notes. And you're missing 99% of the information at the end of the day if you're not somehow recording and transcribing the unfiltered voice of the customer. And so again, in the same study, we did a double click on, okay, you say you're not confident your people know customers today. Why is that the case? Part of the pain point here is like CRM is not set up properly and it doesn't have timely, relevant, and complete data to inform the activities that we need to ensure that we're, one, keeping customers happy, and then two, driving those renewals and hopefully identifying cross-sell, upsell opportunities way in advance so that we can run those sales cycles by the time it comes for renewal. And so first thing is capturing the data. When we do start to capture this, again, unfiltered voice of customer, this is the art of the possible. And again, a very I would say not technical illustration here, but you hear these intent signals, something that a rep could miss and not into the CRM. You set up these AI tools to automate triggers, and then it actually drives the action and best practices of your team. So here's just a good example of, okay, here's maybe a goal or a priority that we didn't hear about or haven't entered into the CRM yet. AI is actually scanning those calls for them and automatically telling the seller, hey, we should start a cross-sell motion. And I think we actually have more of a layout of what that looks like. And when we get into more of the automation workflows later on, this was just teeing up. Do we have all the right data signals to bake into account health scores and ultimately drive the action to make sure that CS, AEs, and AMs responsible for renewals are informed with the right insights and automation that they need?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think we had one more slide from you before we get into some stuff on account data for Jayme.
And this was just putting a bow on this is why do we think customer interaction data is so important to inform these? Well, we actually ran an analysis, right? And so for those respondents in that survey that told us, yes, we are using AI today. And yes, we do capture customer conversations with a conversation intelligence solution, whether or not it's Gong. Those folks told us they were 144% more likely to increase their forecast accuracy in 2024, 66% more likely to say they drove better go-to-market alignment. And then this one was 54% higher growth than the peers not using that data source, right? So kind of highlight here is if you're not using customer interaction data today, think about it. There are a lot of great solutions out there, Gong being one of them. You had your fair share to pick from.
Yeah. And again, this ties it together real nicely with what we talked about before. If you're a CRO, if you're a business executive, the rule of 40, some of these metrics that are super critical to you, we just talked about how you can leverage customer interaction data to actually produce some workflows for your team to go out and execute and act upon. And when you do that, you will see higher growth, which will improve your metrics that are ultimately important for the business. So if you're looking to tie those tactics, those things you can do as an operator to those business outcomes that are super critical for your company, right there, right? It's on the screen. So with that, I guess with that in mind, Jayme, talk about this a little bit as it relates to account data and how are you all using some signals and other data and things that you have available to drive improvements in retention.
Sounds good. And maybe the 12% is screaming in my head right now, which is this, before we get to that, it's really why we are here. Like a lot of people, everyone knows, I think Gong is a household name. It's leading in the conversational intelligence space, and now it's expanding into other areas. And we feel fortunate enough to be paired up with them in this particular forum to talk about how we're helping. The reality is Traction Complete isn't as known of a brand, but this is exactly the point that we solve and why we are here, that 12%. We are like your plumbers to make your house actually run properly. You need to clean it, you need to connect it, and you need to automate it. That's what we exist for. We're a SaaS company that's growing like crazy because that problem is a massive problem for marketing ops, sales ops, and anybody in operations and RevOps. So we're removing duplicates, we're routing those leads, and we're connecting the hierarchies so that you can have full transparency into your go-to-market and know what's happening all natively as an app in Salesforce. So as an example, what we're seeing here, and as a revenue person, what I care about and what I'm responsible for and what I get either promoted or get bonuses on and or fired is revenue.
Over that last part.
Or right? And so critical in this scenario is I'm looking at here, and this is looking at it from a single account. So this account Duo is part of what? Cisco. It churned. It's now 0. If you go to the next, how does that relate to the overall hierarchy? This is all now native in Salesforce. This is the view that I want from RevOps to know what's actually happening to the greater company of Cisco. We're an enterprise-focused organization. So we want to land Fortune 1000 organizations. Let's just put your own organizational hat on. What's your go-to-market? Are you going after mid-market, enterprise? How does that relate? We have Duo in the Cisco hierarchy. We can see that it churned, but now I have full visibility and I can see all of the additional accounts under Cisco. I can see what accounts have been sold. I can see if they're a customer, if they're a target, or if they're a prospect. I can see if they're enterprise. So our go-to-market is the parent-child aligns with all of the subsidiaries. It doesn't go to a mid-market team. It goes to an enterprise team because we're looking to do an enterprise license agreement with that particular account because we're going to know where we're going to put our absolute best account executive on it. We can see what's closed won. I can see what active opportunities, where their location is. Natively in Salesforce, I can see actually the picture is going the other way. So I need full context as a CRO, as an executive, as a RevOps team. The more data points that I have, in this case, even though we churned Duo, in this particular hypothetical scenario, the overall account of Cisco, maybe it then moved toward the parent and we moved it into enterprise license agreement. So critical for me is the revenue signals as well as in addition to the conversational signals. Dan alluded to a lot of the conversational signals and the things that are churn. And as I mentioned earlier, which is like to get Cisco into an account where it should be growing for us as an organization, you need to make sure it's healthy. But then you can also start to put in usage metrics. That's probably the most critical thing for your organization. What is the usage or your NPS? Roll them up into the hierarchy. Give me an overall health score for that parent-child relationship. But in this scenario, we're taking the data of your firmographic, Dun & Bradstreet, whatever you use, HG Insights, Moody's, et cetera. There's a bunch of players out there. And you're putting Traction on top of it to automate so that you have a view both financially and or from a go-to-market perspective as well. So now the CRO can be quick and the CMO can be quick and nimble and deploy resources because all of this aspect in Salesforce is automated instead of pulling it out, not trusting the CRM, et cetera, and so forth. So those are the things that we're seeing, we're seeing our customers, the 1Passwords, the highest growing Zoom that are growing, that are taking advantage of putting hierarchies and automating this particular process.
Yeah, especially at the enterprise level. Like you said, I'm even having flashbacks to company I was at before. Actually, it was OKR software. One of our AEs sold into some team at SAP, and then some other AE sold into some other team at SAP, and we had no idea that either of these things were really happening. And then eventually we figured it out, tried to get that enterprise license agreement, like you said. But parent-child relationships, all that stuff is super challenging within the CRM, and probably a big indicator, going back to Dan's research, of why only 12% of people feel like they actually get actionable insights from their CRM data. So now that we hit on the renewal side a little bit, let's get into some things on the expansion side. So we talked a lot already about why retention and expansion is the name of the game, especially when it comes to software and technology companies. We've got it here on the screen as well. 20% of your existing customers are going to ultimately drive 80% of your organization's future revenue. And so, Dan, I want to kick it over to you first to talk a little bit about some tactics that you can share for expansion.
Yeah, so we teased it before, but I think we have a little bit more. What does this actually entail? And I think there's a great tee up from Jayme is like, you need the plumbing in place, essentially, like all the account hierarchies, understanding, again, like all of this unstructured data that you're getting from conversation intelligence solution is, again, another treasure trove of data you could dip in to ultimately triangulate your deal health scores. But like when we don't have that plumbing in place, we could add all the fancy shiny objects and new cool AI gadgets on top of it, but like we're not going to have the automation that we need and the seamless like handoffs between all of the processes. So I think if you do another click here, you see what are these key moments. So we have the target account. We first identify with a trigger, again, based on what's being talked about by a customer. Is there even the opportunity to cross-sell here? If so, can we actually qualify that and add it to a flow? And so, again, the nice thing about Gong is we do have forecasting solution. We do have a sales engagement solution. So all of this is built into one UI so that like everyone can orchestrate a deal and all the different workflows that you're trying to operationalize as a RevOps professional and make this a lot more seamless for your teams without having to go to disparate tools. So this is just like a good illustration of this all starts with something the customer says, and then we're able to automate a bunch of triggers, whether that be creating like a cross-sell pitch deck or handing over to an account. Again, maybe this was a new feature that they were looking to just understand better. And so we got an sales engineer on the call to demo it for them. They express interest, like how do we get the CSM back up to speed to make sure that they have all of the relevant information and the outcomes that they're trying to drive. We now have AI briefs that seamlessly create those account handovers. So again, just like showing an automation workflow of how it works in the back end, all starting from customer conversation. The next thing I wanted to show you is actually something. So Sunny Gong on our go-to-market strategy team, so as a RevOps practitioner, does some really cool stuff, and I always steal from him. And so this is something I stole from him. But Gong has a tool called Ask Anything, and think of it as ChatGPT for your accounts and deals. So you can ask any question about an individual call that occurred across your organization, a individual opportunity that the team might be working, or at the account hierarchy level. So like asking anything about the lifetime of an account, like what's happening, are they a churn risk? And so if you do another click, what the team did, and Sunny led this initiative, he actually generated a prompt. This was an experiment, and then we went back and tested it on historical data. But he essentially said, hey, Gong AI, tell me what the account score is from 1 to 10. Let's keep it simple. We'll keep it a 1 to 10 score. Based on all the conversations and activity that we've had with this account, can you give me a 1 to 10 score based on, is it basically a churn risk, or should we be engaging them for a cross-sell, upsell opportunity because they're getting so much value out of us? What you'll see on the next slide is not only was it able to generate those scores, but there was very high correlation between what we saw. So you'll see here, the 5 and belows, 78% of those were at risk for logo churn. And this was 6 months before their renewal date was out, versus only 2% of those actually resulted in an ultimate upsell. The 6 to 7s, 33% of those churned, 14% resulted in an upsell. And then the 8 or higher, 28% of those 8 or higher accounts actually resulted in an upsell. And so this is just thinking about, again, this is a very qualitative way of looking at it, taking all that unstructured data, using AI to make it a quantitative score, and then using that as signals for what actions and what remediation should occur so that, one, we're not losing these accounts. So again, keeping all that revenue existing, but then looking for those prime targets to actually go after for an upsell. And what we actually did, we tested these AI generated scores versus just activity scores, looking at like how many meetings with the CSM the account was having and stuff. And this was a much better correlating indicator than, again, as 10 years ago, maybe we're just using CRM activity data. So you kind of illustrate something that we've actually done internally at Gong to maybe inspire some folks that do have access to some cool AI functionality to think outside the box and make an experiment.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And Jayme, how does, again, data, account data, hierarchies, all that stuff, how does that play into this notion of expansion? And while you kind of speak to this, I'm going to launch another poll for us as well to get the audience's view on this.
Okay, so we've got our customers that are healthy. We've reduced churn. We've understand which ones are at risk, and we put a remediation plan. Now it's expand. The same thing goes where oftentimes I'll go, it's like pulling all of these accounts out. And another reason why probably your CRM is only at 12% or below, it's just like put it in Salesforce and be able to track and leverage the power of Salesforce towards it, and which is essentially what we're doing. So if you're using a firmographic, if you're using Dun & Bradstreet, all of the parent-child relationship, put that in and put Traction Complete natively over top of it so that you can then have a complete roll-up, and will give you, as an example, your overall white space, as opposed to peeling it out, taking it out, putting in something else, then pulling it back in and putting it. Just brings time and potential additional error that comes to the equation. We're putting all of that, understanding your overall picture of your go-to-market and your hierarchy on how you would be able to upsell. So if you go forward, that Zoom is a great customer of ours, and they were like, our hierarchy is we're selling to all these accounts and we want to know where we can sell more to it. And they were also under the equation where they were singularly looking at an account. So take Duo, we would look at this account, we churn this account. When they started to look at the global ultimate or the ultimate hierarchy, they had full visibility, and it transformed not only their RevOps and their go-to-market, but also their financial reporting. Because then they got to see the overall picture of what was the health for net retention for the Cisco example, or the Walt Disney, or the Berkshire Hathaway. Pick your large enterprise accounts that has many hierarchies and subsidiaries. We're going to give you that full visibility all the way up. And if you go just to the next slide, and 10% there, or 20%. But then again, this is your visibility in Salesforce, where you have your account, your global ultimate account for that full roll-up. Then you can have total revenue that is showing me. And now I can start to see where's an opportunity in products sold. If you have multiple products, you can see now, what is Gong doing? They have multiple products. What is Traction Complete? We have multiple products that we can, in multiple ways, to bring value. And in the market, we're meeting the market where it is, because they ultimately want less tool stack. They want one CSM. They want less overall cost into the business. So great companies are figuring out how to have a platform play and bring more to it. So then, you have a land play, maybe it's with conversational intelligence. Then you're going to go into forecasting, into the rest of the portfolio. So I know visually right in here, not on some spreadsheet or on some PowerPoint that's on the account, right here as a RevOps team or as a marketing team, and now tie in ABM. Who should we be marketing actually to here? For me, I went to an amazing company called NetSuite, and I was running the whole new business team and the existing business team. I had a new business marketing person who was helping me land new accounts. And NetSuite is a machine on landing accounts. I think they have 30,000 plus SME companies that are running NetSuite. I got introduced to who? Customer marketing. As a newer executive, I was like, what's customer marketing? I have somebody actually focused in on marketing to our customers to help them extract more value. It was like, at the time, I was like, this is brilliant. It's always on, but they were on the game of knowing exactly what Dan was talking about, which is like, you should have a strategy around what are you doing? How do you continue the maturity curve and help them create even more value in the experience? And you can do it now here in Salesforce. You can actually see, which products that we have. Marketing can come in here. We should be marketing to the rest of the family tree in Cisco, because we know this is a strategic lighthouse account for us. So which hierarchies should we be going after? What products do they have? All that visibility right here, real time, automated in Salesforce. So that's the thing that gets me super jazzed up, is it's not outside of Salesforce. It's right here, giving RevOps, marketing ops a strategic advantage, both like financially on the net retention hack, in addition to how you should be thinking about your go-to-market, how you can help your CMO, how you can help your CRO bring meaningful data forward.
I remember a story from Hillary Headley, who used to be the head of sales ops over at Zoom from a while back, that she was telling about. She was like, hey, and now she's at Insight Partners, but it was pre-Traction Complete day. She was like, oh yeah, CEO asked me in a meeting, like, hey, can you just tell me the last time we talked to like IBM? And she's like, yeah, no problem. Like that'll be easy, right? And she like went into the CRM and was like, oh God, this is not going to be easy at all. We have a gazillion different separate accounts for IBM, and I have no idea how to answer this question now. So yeah, it's a very real problem, can get complicated very, very fast. So let's bring it all together, spend the last like 9 minutes here. Jayme and Dan, I want you to give some final thoughts, and I got a backlog of some questions that I want to ask y'all. So I guess, Jayme, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about just wrapping all this stuff together, from retention to expansion, tactics, data, conversational intelligence, the growth mindset. What do you got?
So a couple things. One, I think it's the tone in the company. If you're not the executive on that call, you can still bring data forward to help it become the conversation in your organization. So that's what we kicked off, Dan and I, at the start, which is it's like setting the tone that this is the number one priority of your organization. Look after your customers, make sure that they love your product service offering and that they can grow with you and extract more value. So you got to look after them. We gave you lots of little hacks on where to actually think about usage, conversational insights, and then automation within both signals from what's happening at the health of the account to also revenue insights to what's happening into the overall parent. So that's on the green. Take care of your customer first, then get into growth mode. That will ultimately be growth mode already as is, but then you can get truly into kind of an expand and adding additional product services and offering by, again, looking just a little bit differently and automating those things within your sales force. So that's again, the insights into the conversational intelligence piece of how we're identifying what is potentially possible, where there's upsell, cross-sell. What Traction also does beautifully is not only cleaning, reducing duplicates, so you actually have one good master view of the record, is you're routing the leads to the right person at the right time. So if you have an enterprise selling motion, you probably don't want that lead to be routed to a mid-market person in the hierarchy. So making sure there's no account conflicts there. It's routing to your hierarchy, because marketing is spending a ton of money to try to help you win more as a sales and go-to-market team. So making sure that your systems are aligned to maximize that. And that will ultimately allow you to get into massive green, if you will, but expanding across the enterprise. Dan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dan, what about you?
Yeah, it's a great summary. And as I was looking back on everything we talked, I mean, it's probably no surprise for a RevOps event, but like it all starts with the data, right? Both the organization of the data you currently have. Are there new untapped sources that we could potentially start pulling from to supplement or amplify these, like our account health scores that we're triangulating? And then ultimately, all the data in the world is great, but is it served up as insights to the right people at the right time? And that's where I think, again, the next maybe 18 months or so, we're going to start seeing a lot of solutions that are making a lot of promises around that automation and initiating those workflows to hopefully ultimately grow NRR. Are the hierarchies in place? Is the data structured in a way? And again, CRM is still the source of truth, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But how do we make it as actionable and usable as possible with the right data? And I think that's how it's actually a really nice marriage of both logos on the bottom left corner of the slide here. Is we have a data source that's historically been untapped, and then a legacy system that's just been clunky, honestly, for lack of better words. So again, I'm probably being a little bit redundant based on what Jayme said, but it all starts with data, and it seems pretty cliche, but
yeah,
true.
There was
makes sense.
Which is everyone's thinking. And probably we should say, like, in addition to expand, the poll would be, what are you thinking about tech or bringing into your organization? It's probably number one thing that I hear is, hey, how can automation or AI help accelerate or lower cost, reduce consolidation? How can we take advantage of it? If you have garbage in, you're going to then lose trust pretty quickly from your frontline sellers. So taking advantage of actually connecting and making sure that you have the right view of the particular account hierarchy can ultimately serve up then better data going forward and take advantage of all the amazing insights that Gong is bringing to the marketplace for our sellers.
Yeah, it makes sense. So we've got a couple of questions that are in the backlog that I want to get answered. So Dan, I'll ask you this first one. There's two parts of this. One, I don't know if you and Joe Ort know each other, but he said, Dan, how much do you bench? So that's question number one. Jayme, I'll let you answer that afterwards. And then Vivian is also asking, how do you look at leveraging AI to produce content? And especially, we talked a little bit about how you can trigger workflows from customer conversations? Do you all at Gong especially use any of the conversational intelligence that you sit on and the way that customers actually talk to influence content that you create, or even the words and things that you use in the content? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So without making this a Gong sales pitch, I couldn't imagine being a content marketer today. With Gong, it sounds cliche, and I feel like everyone that works for a SaaS company says that about their solution. But from content ideation, right? So Gong now is able to track what we call trends or themes. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so Gong's AI has gotten to the point where across our entire customer base, in every conversation sellers are having with customers, as a marketer, I unfortunately just don't get to be on that many customer conversations. These trends surface, like, what are the challenges that teams are trying to solve? A good example of that is we have our priorities from product marketing of all the cool new features that we're launching. When I first joined Gong back in 2021, it was the beginning of the great reshuffle or the great resignation. Again, talent management is not a solution that Gong provides, but this was a challenge that was like core to our key persona. And so having the intelligence of revenue leaders are talking about attracting the top talent at this time when there's a lot of shuffle going on. They want to know how to keep their best people. And so as a result of hearing that this was the top challenging team we were facing, I was able to go make a business case to run research around what we call the state of sales talent report. So that's one, content IDA, using the voice of the customer to actually understand what are the challenges they're trying to solve so that we can create content that resonates. The second is attribution. So after I send that into market, if we put it behind a gated form, we're going to have number of downloads. And then we're able to track, like, okay, MQLs as a result of that. And then did it actually influence or source any pipeline or revenue? That's all great. But where there's tremendous value for me and selfishly to prove that I'm doing my job well is I create trackers in Gong every time I create a new piece of research. And I'm able to understand, one, how often is that piece coming up? And then two, is it actually resonating with customers and they're speaking about it in a positive way? Is there something I missed the mark on? And so Gong doesn't write content for me today. I think eventually maybe it will. But in terms of like content ideation and then content attribution, in terms of is it impacting and meaningful to the conversations our sellers are having, it's been like a game changer.
No, that's good stuff. And then Jayme, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was around usage metrics. So at Traction, and again, what you've seen maybe at other companies you've been at, or even just from your customers, what are some of the most important usage metrics that you all look at to identify account health, customer health? What are some of the recommendations you have there?
Yeah, every company is probably unique and a little bit different on what usage, depending on what you're thinking about. But if you have how they're using it and then the outcome of it is the thing that I also like to see, because you want to tie back to here's the impact that it's having on the business. So I always try to challenge the account management team to be, or the CS team, usage is up. Overall, they're using the product. If it's a daily use product, et cetera, and so forth, then what's the impact that that's having? Are you tying it to revenue? Is it linked into your CRM? And what impact that it's ultimately having there? So
make sure it's relevant for you. The important takeaway there, tie it to usage frequency, but make sure that it's relevant to your business. Things that have worked maybe for you in the past at prior companies should not be the same exact things by default that you look at your current org. So with that, we are at time. Jayme and Dan, thank you guys very much for joining and dropping some knowledge on us. To all the attendees that are out there, thank you for joining as well. When you leave, you'll be prompted to fill out a 2-question survey to provide some feedback. So please do that. We take it all very seriously. We started the call with Jayme telling us his walk-up song would be turn the TV off. So I'm going to tell you all to turn the Zoom off now. That is all we got for you. Have a good rest of your Thursday. We'll see you at the next one, everybody.